Rome was hit by 3 pandemics in 400 years. It never once changed its response. That killed the empire. Rome built roads that lasted 2,000 years, aqueducts that still carry water, laws that govern nations today, but it never built a public health system. And that failure cost more lives than any war Rome ever fought. More Romans died of plague than in every battle the legions ever fought. Combined, the Battle of Cannae killed 50,000 Romans in a day. The Antonine Plague killed that many every month. The question is not why the plagues happened. The question is why Rome never adapted. Adaptation requires institutional memory. Rome had institutions. It had no memory for plague. 3 plagues, 400 years, and modern DNA has now identified what each one was. We know what killed them. The question is why they never learned to fight back. The first plague arrived in 165 CE. At the height of Rome's power, the empire stretched from Scotland to Iraq, 100 million people, the largest state the world had ever seen. Dense cities connected by fast roads and shipping lanes. The perfect infrastructure for pandemic spread. Every port was a gateway, every ship a vector. The Mediterranean was an epidemiological network. Roman legions had just defeated the Parthian Empire in Mesopotamia. They marched home victorious. They also carried something back from the east, a pathogen the empire had never encountered. The legions marched 2,000 kilometers home. Every camp they pitched became a new infection point. The plague followed the roads camp to camp, city to city, from the Euphrates to the Thames, from Seleucia to Aquileia in months. The roads that moved legions moved plague faster. The soldiers brought home victory. And a plague that would kill 5 to 10 million people. The Antonine Plague, named after the ruling dynasty. It ravaged the empire for 15 years. The physician Galen documented the symptoms: fever, pustular skin eruptions, bloody diarrhea, death within 2 weeks. Galen was the greatest physician of the ancient world. He documented the plague and then fled Rome to avoid it. He could describe what he saw. He could not explain what caused it. Germ theory was 18 centuries away. Humoral medicine, the theory that disease came from imbalanced fluids, elegant, logical, completely wrong. At its peak, 2,000 people were dying per Dalton Y in Rome alone. 2,000 per Dalton Y in a city of 1 million. Roughly 1 in every 500 residents dying daily at the peak. What was it? Most historians believe smallpox. Galen's symptom descriptions align closely, but no confirmed ancient DNA has been recovered. The identification is clinical, not molecular. The Italian climate destroys DNA. The Roman cremation practice destroyed bone. Very few burial samples survive. Cremation was standard Roman practice until the 3rd century. Every cremated body is a lost genome. Ashes yield nothing. The Antonine Plague pathogen may never be confirmed because Rome burned its evidence, and Rome's response to the plague was no response at all. No quarantine, no isolation of the sick, no changes to sanitation. The legions continued marching. The roads stayed open. The markets stayed open. The baths stayed full. The temples offered prayers. No medical intervention. Every one of these measures was within Roman administrative capacity. None were attempted. The empire that administered taxes from Scotland to Egypt could not administer a quarantine. Tax records from every province, census data from every city, the data to track a plague existed. Nobody used it. Rome's answer to the worst plague in its history was to keep doing what it was already doing. Nothing changed. The empire survived, but the legions were permanently weakened. Frontier defenses never fully recovered. Fewer recruits, lower quality. The plague killed Rome's best soldiers and left the frontiers exposed. The barbarians noticed every plague weakened the frontier. Every frontier weakness invited attack. The Rhine frontier depleted by plague, crossed by barbarians who had no plagues of their own. Then 85 years later, it happened again. The plague of Cyprian, 250 CE, named after the Christian bishop who documented it. Cyprian saw the plague as divine punishment. His description of symptoms was clinical, but his explanation was theological. Christianity grew during the plagues. The Roman gods offered no protection. The Christian God offered meaning. Christians nursed the sick when pagans fled. The care attracted converts. Plague fueled religious revolution. Cyprian described vomiting, diarrhea, gangrene of the hands and feet, and blindness in survivors. Different symptoms from the Antonine Plague. This was a different disease. Different symptoms, different pathogen, same non-response from the empire. Two different diseases, two different centuries. The same policy of doing nothing. The Senate debated wars and taxes. It never debated plague response. Disease was not a political issue. Different symptoms from the Antonine Plague. This was a different disease. Ancient DNA from Cyprian-era mass burials has been extracted, but the pathogen has not been conclusively identified. Smallpox, measles, viral hemorrhagic fever, pandemic influenza, all proposed, none confirmed. At Thebes in Egypt, archaeologists found mass burials from the Cyprian period. Bodies covered in lime. The lime was meant to disinfect. It may have slowed the smell. It did nothing to stop the disease. Lime kills bacteria on contact, but it cannot stop airborne transmission or fleas. Lime to contain the smell. Lime to try to stop the spread. The first evidence of any Roman attempt at disease control. After 85 years, Rome's only new idea was to pour lime on the bodies. That was the entire public health innovation across 85 years and 2 pandemics. 5,000 people dying per Dalton Y in Rome at the peak. The empire lost perhaps a quarter of its population. 5,000 per Dalton Y. For months, the cemeteries overflowed, the streets filled with the unburied. The plague of Cyprian destabilized the empire so badly that the following decades are called the crisis of the 3rd century. Civil war, economic collapse, barbarian invasions, all made possible by the demographic disaster of repeated plagues. 26 emperors in 50 years, most died violently. The plague did not cause the crisis alone, but it made it inevitable. Weak armies, empty treasuries, depopulated provinces. The plague created the vacuum that civil war filled. Debased coins, hyperinflation, economic collapse. The financial symptoms of a plague-ravaged empire. Fewer workers, higher wages, lower tax revenue. The economic spiral that plague accelerated. And still, Rome learned nothing. No sanitation reforms, no quarantine, no isolation protocols, nothing. 300 years after the first plague, the third one arrived, and this time, DNA tells us exactly what it was. 541 CE, Constantinople, grain ships from Egypt arrived carrying rats. Within weeks, people in the harbor district began dying. Rats in the grain, fleas on the rats, Yersinia pestis in the fleas. The chain of transmission that Rome never understood. The transmission chain invisible to Roman observers. Understood only 1,500 years later, the Justinianic plague. And unlike the first two, we know exactly what caused it because we found the DNA. Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium that caused the Black Death 800 years later. Ancient DNA extracted from 6th century burials in Germany confirmed the pathogen in 2013. Confirmed in Germany, then Spain, then England, then Central Asia. The plague was everywhere. Even in rural England, even in the steppes of Central Asia, the plague reached everywhere the trade routes reached. Same species, different lineage. The Justinianic strain went extinct. The Black Death strain evolved separately. 2 separate emergences of the same species, 800 years apart. Both devastating. Same bacterium, same devastation, 8 centuries apart. Humanity learned nothing in between. The same species, different strain, but the same terrifying bacterium. 25 to 50 million people dead across the Mediterranean world the Eastern Roman Empire permanently crippled. Emperor Justinian contracted the plague himself. He survived. His imperial ambitions did not. Justinian was rebuilding the Roman Empire. The plague stopped him. The reconquest ended. The empire shrank. And still, the response was the same. No quarantine infrastructure, no epidemiological investigation. 3 plagues across 4 centuries. And the medical response was essentially identical each time. Byzantine physicians were still consulting Galen's writings from the 2nd century. 400 years of unchanged medical thinking. The Chinese had smallpox inoculation by the 10th century. Rome never developed anything comparable. Other civilizations were advancing public health. Rome was rereading the same books. The infrastructure that made Rome great also made it vulnerable. The roads that connected the empire also connected its epidemics. The shipping lanes that fed Rome also fed the plague. Every Roman innovation that made the empire strong also made the plague spread faster. Dense cities, communal baths, crowded insulae apartments, military barracks. Every Roman institution was a plague amplifier. The famous Roman baths, public health marvels in normal times, plague transmission engines during epidemics. And what does modern DNA tell us about why Rome failed? DNA reveals the 3 plagues were 3 different diseases. Rome was fighting blind every time. 3 different pathogens, 3 different transmission methods. The same response to each one. Smallpox spreads through respiratory droplets. Plague through flea bites. Each requires a different containment strategy. Rome treated them all the same way. Prayers, purges, and patience. None of which worked. Modern medicine identified all 3 pathogens from ancient bones. Rome could not identify any of them. The cumulative cost of 3 uncontrolled pandemics was the empire itself. Each plague removed 10 to 25% of the population. The empire never fully recovered between outbreaks. Each generation was smaller than the last. The empire shrank with its population, 100 million at the peak, 30 million by the 7th century, a 70% decline. Aqueducts built for cities of 1 million serving villages of 1,000. The infrastructure outlived the population. 3 dips, 3 incomplete recoveries. The trend line only goes one direction down. Cities in North Africa, Syria, and Anatolia that thrived in the 2nd century were abandoned by the 7th. Leptis Magna, Timgad, Palmyra. Cities that once held hundreds of thousands empty by the 7th century. Timgad, built by Trajan. Abandoned after the plagues, the grid is still visible from space. The plagues did not destroy Rome in a day. They bled it across 4 centuries until there was nothing left to defend. Rome's biggest mistake was not the plagues themselves. It was the failure to learn from each one. The roads survived. The aqueducts survived. The empire did not. 3 pathogens. Identified by modern DNA, 3 chances Rome had to build a public health response. 3 chances wasted. 3 pandemics. 4 centuries. 0 institutional learning. The pattern is the lesson. Arrival, inaction. Mass death, partial recovery. Repeat. 400 years of the same cycle. Prayers, sacrifices, processions. The religious response that substituted for medical action. If Rome had quarantined its ports after the first plague, the next 2 might never have spread. But Rome never tried. The ports stayed open. The ships kept sailing. The plagues kept spreading. Quarantine was invented in the 14th century. Rome could have invented it 12 centuries earlier. The concept was within reach. Venice invented quarantine after the Black Death. Rome had the administrative power to do it centuries earlier. Quarantine islands, isolation hospitals. Venice built them after 1 plague. Rome never built them after 3. Venice learned from 1 pandemic. Rome failed to learn from 3. The difference was institutional memory. The bones told us what killed Rome. The archives told us Rome never listened. 3 plagues, 400 years, 0 lessons learned. That was Rome's biggest mistake. The same roads, the same ships, The same city's infrastructure that could have been used for quarantine was used for nothing. The greatest engineering civilization in history, defeated by the smallest enemies on Earth, an empire of stone and iron, brought down by organisms too small to see. 1 micrometer, long invisible to the naked eye, and it brought down the greatest empire in history. Sources in the description. Subscribe if you want to see what DNA reveals next. If 3 plagues could not teach Rome, what plagues has the modern world already ignored?